December 21st, 2019. The thermometer outside the Hollow Creek Pack House read 18 degrees Fahrenheit at 6:47 in the morning, but inside the industrial kitchen the heat was suffocating. Steam rose from 3 massive stockpots boiling on the ancient gas stove, fogging the windows, until the Montana wilderness outside became nothing more than a gray blur. Wren Ashford stood at the scarred, wooden prep table, her hands moving mechanically through the rhythm she had perfected over 2 years of servitude. Dice the carrots, peel the potatoes. Don't think, don't feel, just survive the next hour, then the hour after that. She was 22 years old, but malnutrition and exhaustion had stolen the bloom from her face, leaving her looking closer to 16. At 5 feet 3 and 98 pounds, she was small even for an Omega. Her dark hair pulled back in a fraying braid hadn't been properly washed in a week. Her clothes, donated cast-offs from the Pack's charity bin, hung loose on her frame. The threadbare thermal shirt had a burn hole near the collar. The jeans were 2 sizes too large, held up with a length of rope tied around her waist. But it was her hands that told the real story. Scarred, calloused, marked with the fresh pink wounds of a kitchen slave. 3 fingers on her left hand were wrapped in gauze, still healing from last Tuesday, when she had slipped with the vegetable peeler, and Alpha Garrett had refused to let her stop working long enough to bandage them properly. The basement room where she slept, if you could call it sleeping, was directly below the kitchen, 8 by 10 feet. No windows. A cot with a blanket so thin she could see through it. A bucket in the corner. The sound of boots on the floor above her head at all hours, reminding her that she existed at the pleasure of people who would not notice if she disappeared. The Hollow Creek Pack wasn't large. 47 members, most of them descended from the original settlers who had claimed this valley in 1892. They prided themselves on tradition, on the old ways, on maintaining the hierarchy that had served their ancestors. Alphas at the top, betas in the middle, omegas at the bottom, useful for labor and little else. Wren's father, Elias Ashford, had been different. He had been a gardener, a quiet man who spent his days coaxing roses to bloom in soil that should have been too harsh, too cold, too unforgiving. The Pack had mocked him for it, called him weak because he refused to shift, refused to fight, refused to participate in the dominance games that the other males played. They said his heart had been weak too, that the heart attack that killed him in January of 2017 was proof that gentleness had no place in the world of wolves. Wren knew better. Her father had been the strongest person she had ever known. He had taught her things, practical things, how to read a barometer, how to predict a storm 3 days out by watching the behavior of birds, how to sketch a map so detailed you could navigate in complete darkness, how to use a ham radio, the old-fashioned kind that the Pack had discarded in favor of cell phones and satellites, the kind that still worked when everything else failed. He had given her his old journal, a leather-bound book filled with his careful handwriting, weather patterns, topographical notes, frequencies for emergency channels. He had pressed it into her hands 2 weeks before he died, his grip weak but his eyes fierce. "Weather saves lives, little Wren," he had whispered. "When the world tries to bear you, you fly above the storm." She kept the journal hidden beneath a loose floorboard in her basement room. It was the only thing she owned that mattered. The kitchen door slammed open with enough force to rattle the pots hanging from their hooks. Wren flinched, her shoulders automatically hunching into the defensive posture that had become second nature. She didn't look up. Looking up invited eye contact, and eye contact invited punishment. Alpha Garrett, Voss, strode in his boots, tracking snow and mud across the floor. Wren had scrubbed at midnight. He was a big man, 6'2" broad through the chest and shoulders, carrying the kind of bulk that came from good genetics and better nutrition. At 38, he was in his physical prime, and he knew it. His dark hair was slicked back with too much product. His jaw was perpetually shadowed with stubble. He cultivated because he thought it made him look dangerous. His eyes were pale gray cold as the January sky. He was carrying a coffee mug, the expensive ceramic kind he had ordered from a catalog. Behind him, 3 of his betas filed in, laughing at something one of them had said. They were younger, mid-20s, eager to prove themselves by mimicking everything Garrett did. Wren kept her eyes on the carrots. Dice, dice, dice. The knife was sharp. She had made sure of that. A dull knife was dangerous. It slipped. It cut wrong. She couldn't afford another injury. "Omega," Garrett said. His voice was casual, almost friendly. That was when he was most dangerous. "Yes, Alpha." Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Did you make my breakfast?" "Yes, Alpha. 3 eggs over medium, bacon crisp, toast wheat, no butter, orange juice fresh squeezed. It's plated in the warming drawer." "Good girl." He walked past her to retrieve his plate. The betas clustered near the industrial refrigerator, pulling out sandwich fixings for themselves. The Pack House had a formal dining room, but Garrett preferred to eat in the kitchen. He said it was because he liked to keep an eye on operations. Wren knew it was because he enjoyed watching her work, enjoyed the subtle cruelty of making her prepare food she would never be allowed to eat. The Omegas got one meal a day: thin soup, mostly water, stale bread, whatever vegetables were too bruised to serve to the ranked wolves. She had learned to stretch it, to make it last, to trick her body into forgetting the constant gnawing ache of hunger. Garrett settled into the chair at the head of the kitchen table, the one with the worn cushion that molded to his shape. He cut into his eggs with the side of his fork, watching the yolk bleed across the plate. One of the betas said something about the upcoming solstice party. Garrett grunted in response, his attention fixed on his food. Wren reached for another carrot. Her hands were shaking. She couldn't tell if it was from exhaustion or cold or the adrenaline that never quite left her system. The kitchen felt too small, too hot, the walls pressing in. She forced herself to breathe slowly, evenly, through her nose. Panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. She had survived 1,066 days since her father died. She could survive one more. The knife slipped. It was a tiny thing, a quarter-inch deviation from the cutting line, but it was enough. The blade caught the edge of the carrot and skittered sideways straight into the ceramic plate she had been using as a cutting board. The plate didn't break. It was too thick for that. But it made a sound, a sharp, scraping squeal that cut through the low conversation at the table like a gunshot. The room went silent. Wren froze the knife still in her hand, her pulse suddenly pounding in her ears. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Maybe if she stayed perfectly still, he would let it pass. Maybe he was in a good mood. Maybe, "Did you just scratch my mother's plate?" Garrett's voice was very quiet. The plate wasn't his mother's. His mother had died in 1996, long before Wren was born. But Garrett had a story for every object in the pack house, a provenance that elevated common items into sacred relics. The plates were his mother's. The pots were his grandmother's. The wooden spoons had been carved by his great-grandfather. It was all lies, but the lies gave him an excuse. "I'm sorry, Alpha." Wren set the knife down carefully, precisely making sure the blade faced away. "It was an accident. It won't happen again." "No," Garrett said, pushing his chair back from the table. "It won't." He crossed the kitchen in 4 strides. Wren didn't run. There was nowhere to run. The betas had positioned themselves between her and the door, whether consciously or unconsciously. The pack house was a maze of hallways and lock-in doors, and even if she made it outside, where would she go? The nearest town was 40 miles south. The roads were iced over. She had no coat, no money, no vehicle. Garrett stopped in front of her, close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath, the bacon grease on his fingers. He was smoking again. She could smell it on his clothes, that acrid cigarette stink that clung to everything. "Give me your hand," he said. Wren's throat closed. She knew what was coming. This wasn't the first time, it wouldn't be the last. She extended her left hand, the one with the bandaged fingers, palm up. Submissive, compliant, the model Omega. Garrett pulled a lighter from his pocket. It was silver, engraved with the pack crest, a gift from his father when he had claimed the Alpha position 6 years ago. He flicked it open with his thumb, struck the flint. The flame caught blue at the base, yellow at the tip, dancing in the overheated air of the kitchen. "You need to learn to be more careful," Garrett said almost kindly. He grabbed her wrist with his free hand, his grip tight enough to grind the bones together. "Accidents have consequences." He pressed the flame to the inside of her wrist, just below the gauze wrapping her fingers. The pain was immediate, white-hot electric. It traveled up her arm into her shoulder, exploding behind her eyes in a starburst of agony. Wren bit down on her tongue hard enough to taste blood. She didn't scream. Screaming made it worse. Screaming meant he would do it again longer because he liked the sound. 5 seconds, 10, 15. The smell of burning flesh filled the kitchen, sweet and nauseating. One of the betas shifted uncomfortably. The other 2 watched with the blank curiosity of men who had seen this before and no longer questioned it. Finally, Garrett released her. Wren pulled her hand back, cradling it against her chest. The burn was the size of a dime, red and blistering, oozing clear fluid. It would scar. They all scarred. She had 7 cigarette burns on her arms, 3 on her shoulders, 1 on the back of her neck, hidden by her hair. Each one a lesson. Each one a reminder that she was property, not a person. "Clean up this mess," Garrett said, gesturing at the cutting board. "And don't let it happen again." "Yes, Alpha." He returned to his breakfast like nothing had happened. The betas resumed their conversations, something about a hunting trip next week, something about territory disputes with a neighboring pack. Normal pack business. The world moved on. Wren's wrist screamed. She finished preparing the vegetables with her right hand, the left one throbbing in time with her heartbeat. The water in the sink ran pink when she finally allowed herself to rinse the burn, the cold providing a moment of relief before the pain surged back relentless. She wrapped it in a clean dish, hiding it from view. Weakness invited more abuse. She had learned that lesson early. By the time the sun fully rose at 8:17 a.m., Wren had prepared breakfast for 47 pack. Members cleaned the kitchen, started 3 loads of laundry, and scrubbed the main hallway floors. Her wrist was swollen hot to the touch. Definitely infected. She had no access to antibiotics. The pack doctor would not treat an Omega without the Alpha's permission, and Garrett would not grant permission. She would have to treat it herself with whatever she could find. Salt water, clean cloth, prayer. The pack house emptied out as the morning progressed. The ranked wolves had jobs, lives, responsibilities that took them into the human world. Garrett ran a logging operation, legal on the surface, less legal in practice. The betas worked for him, driving trucks, managing crews, cooking the books. The adult Omegas, the 8 others who shared Wren's status, scattered to their assigned tasks, cleaning, cooking, childcare, laundry, the invisible labor that kept the pack running. Wren had 30 minutes before she was expected to start lunch preparations. 30 minutes of unobserved time, precious as gold. She slipped down the back stairs to the basement, moving quietly despite the fact that the house was mostly empty. Habit. Survival instinct. Her room was exactly as she had left it. Cot, bucket, the smell of mildew and concrete. She knelt beside the loose floorboard near the corner, the one that creaked when you stepped on it, but lifted easily if you knew where to press. The journal was there, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag to protect it from moisture. She pulled it out, held it for a moment against her chest, feeling the worn leather, the weight of her father's words. Then she opened it to the back pages where she had been keeping her own records for the past 2 years. Maps. Detailed, obsessive maps. The pack house, every room, every hallway, every exit. The surrounding forest marked with trails, landmarks, distances measured in careful paces. The town of Hollow Creek, 40 miles south, sketched from memory of the one time Garrett had taken her there to load supplies. And escape routes, a dozen of them. Paths through the forest that avoided patrol areas, roads that led to highways, distances to the nearest bus station, the nearest hospital, the nearest police department that might actually help an Omega fleeing her pack. She had never used any of them. Escape required resources. Money, a vehicle, winter clothing, a destination. She had none of these things, but planning gave her something to do in the long hours when sleep wouldn't come, when the cold was too intense, when the hunger made her stomach cramp and twist. Planning kept her sane. She turned to a fresh page and pulled out the stub of a pencil she kept tucked in the journal's spine. Today was December 21st, the winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Tomorrow the light would begin its slow return. In 2 days would be the anniversary of her father's death. December 23rd, 2017. She had found him in the greenhouse behind the pack house, slumped over his potting bench, his face gray, his lips blue. The medic had called it a massive heart attack. Natural causes, tragic but not unexpected for a man with a weak constitution. Wren had never believed it. Her father had been healthy, strong. He had passed his last physical with perfect marks. And in the weeks before he died, he had been different. Paranoid, jumpy. He had started sleeping with his bedroom door locked. He had stopped eating food he hadn't prepared himself. He had whispered to her late one night when he thought she was asleep, "If anything happens to me, visit my grave every year. The truth is buried there." She had thought he was being metaphorical. Now, 2 years later, she wondered if he had meant it literally. Hollow Creek had a cemetery, if you could call it that. St. Jude Cemetery, 3 miles northeast of the pack house, was a desolate patch of land where the pack buried those they didn't care to remember. Omegas, outcasts, wolves who had died in disgrace. Her father's grave was there in the far corner beneath a gnarled oak tree. A flat stone marker, no flowers, no offerings. She had visited once a week after the funeral before Garrett had made it clear that Omegas were not permitted to leave Packlands without permission. But the anniversary was in 2 days. And anniversaries were powerful things in the world of wolves. Dates mattered. Rituals mattered. If her father had hidden something, if there was a truth buried with him, December 23rd was the day to find it. She just had to get there. Wren pulled out the weather section of her journal, the pages filled with her careful tracking of barometric pressure, temperature, fluctuations, wind patterns. She had been monitoring the data from the old ham radio in the pack house attic, the one no one knew she had access to, the one she had repaired, using parts scavenged from the junk pile behind the garage. A storm was coming, not in 2 days but soon after. Possibly December 26th or 27th. A big one, the kind that would dump 2 feet of snow and shut down the roads for days. She could feel it in the air in the way the birds had been acting and the pressure building behind her eyes. But the night of December 23rd would be clear. Cold, brutally cold, but clear. The pack was throwing a solstice party tonight and tomorrow. They did it every year, a pagan holdover that they clung to, despite the veneer of Christianity they presented to the human world. There would be drinking, loud music, distraction. If she was careful, if she timed it right, she could slip out the basement window after dark on the 23rd, 3 miles through the forest, say goodbye to her father, return before dawn. No one would even know she was gone. It was stupid. It was dangerous. If Garrett caught her, the punishment would be severe. But the compulsion was too strong to ignore. Her father had saved her over and over in all the small ways that mattered. The least she could do was honor his memory, even if it was just for a few stolen minutes in a frozen graveyard. She made her decision. December 23rd, the anniversary. One last conversation with a ghost. Wren closed the journal, wrapped it back in its plastic shroud, and returned it to its hiding place beneath the floorboard. Then she stood, straightened her spine, and climbed back up the stairs to the kitchen. Lunch wouldn't cook itself. The floors wouldn't scrub themselves. The world expected her to be invisible, and she would give them exactly what they expected. But in 2 nights, for just a few hours, she would be something else. She would be her father's daughter. December 23rd, 2019. The temperature dropped to minus 23 degrees Fahrenheit by the time the sun disappeared behind the western ridge at 4:47 p.m. Wren watched it go from the small window above the kitchen sink, her hands submerged in dishwater, so hot it had turned her fingers pink and wrinkled. The sky bled from pale blue to violet to deep indigo, the color of a bruise spreading across the horizon. The solstice party had started yesterday at noon and continued through today. By evening, the pack house vibrated with noise. Bass-heavy music pounded through the walls, shaking dust from the ceiling beams. Male voices roared with laughter. Glass shattered somewhere in the main hall, followed by more laughter, louder this time, edged with the kind of hysteria that came from too much whiskey and too little consequence. Wren had served the food for both days. Platters of venison roast rare enough that blood pooled on the serving plates. Roasted potatoes drowning in butter and herbs. Fresh bread, the expensive kind Garrett ordered from a bakery in town. Not the stale loaves the Omegas ate. Apple pie, pumpkin pie, pecan pie. Enough food to feed twice the pack's number, because waste was a display of dominance, proof that Hollow Creek had resources to burn. She had not been permitted to eat any of it. She had been given her standard meal at 11 a.m. before the festivities intensified. Thin vegetable broth. A heel of bread so hard she had to soak it in the broth to make it edible. A bruised apple brown on one side. She had eaten slowly, making it last, knowing it would be her only sustenance until tomorrow morning. Now it was 11:34 p.m. The party showed no signs of slowing. If anything, it was reaching a fever pitch. Someone had started a bonfire in the back courtyard, despite the temperature. Wren could see the orange glow through the frosted windows, figures moving around it like shadows in a fever dream. The drums had come out, the old ceremonial ones that the pack claimed had been passed down from their ancestors. The rhythm was primal, insistent, designed to wake something ancient in the blood. Perfect. The more distracted they were, the better. Wren finished the last of the dishes and dried her hands on a threadbare towel. Her wrist still throbbed where Garrett had burned her 2 mornings ago, the infection spreading, despite the gauze she'd wrapped around it. The wound was angry red, leaking a thin yellow fluid that soaked through the bandage. But she had suffered worse. Pain was just information. It told you that you were still alive. She moved through the kitchen with practiced efficiency, her footsteps silent on the worn linoleum. The other Omegas had already retreated to their rooms, dismissed for the night once the food was served and the cleanup was done. The ranked wolves would destroy the main hall tonight, and tomorrow the Omegas would spend all day scrubbing vomit and alcohol stains and gods knew what else from the floors and furniture. But that was tomorrow's problem. Tonight Wren had a grave to visit. She descended the back stairs to the basement, each step familiar in the darkness. She didn't need light. She had walked this path 1,000 times, her feet knowing exactly where the steps creaked, where the railing was loose, where the ceiling dipped low enough to graze the top of her head if she wasn't careful. Her room was black as pitch. No windows, no ambient light from street lamps or moon. Just absolute darkness and the smell of mildew and cold concrete. She navigated by touch and memory, finding the loose floorboard, retrieving her journal. She wouldn't take it with her, too risky, but she needed to check one more time to make sure she had the route memorized to verify the distances and landmarks. 3.2 miles from the basement window to St. Jude's Cemetery. Northeast through the forest following the creek bed for the first 1.5 miles, then cutting east where the creek forked. Avoid the patrol route that ran along the northern ridge. Cross the old logging road at the mile marker. Navigate by the oak tree, the one split by lightning 3 years ago, distinctive even in darkness. The cemetery gate would be unlocked. It was always unlocked. No one bothered to secure a graveyard for forgotten wolves. 47 minutes at a fast walk accounting for snow depth and terrain. Longer if she had to move carefully avoiding detection. She had 2 hours before the patrol rotation changed at 2 a.m. 2 hours to make the journey, say her goodbye, and return. It was tight, but possible. She returned the journal to its hiding place and reached for the small bundle she had prepared and hidden beneath her cot. A stolen wool coat too large for her, but better than nothing. It had been in the donation bin 3 weeks ago, destined for one of the human charities the pack pretended to support. Wren had taken it heart-pounding knowing that theft was punishable by beating. But she couldn't make this journey in the thin thermal shirt she wore. The cold would kill her before she made it half a mile. Thick socks, 2 pairs liberated from the laundry room. Boots that were 1 size too big lined with newspaper to make them fit better to provide extra insulation. A knit cap that she pulled low over her ears. Gloves with holes in 3 fingers, but gloves nonetheless. And wrapped carefully in a scrap of cloth, a single white rose. She had found it yesterday in the dumpster behind the flower shop in town, discarded because its petals were browning at the edges, no longer perfect enough to sell. She had smuggled it back in her coat pocket, kept it in a jar of water in the corner of her room, where the shadows were deepest. It was half frozen now, the petals brittle, but it was all she had to offer. Her father had loved white roses. He had said they were the most honest flower, beautiful without pretense, thriving in adversity. Wren dressed quickly, her breath misting in the unheated basement. The coat smelled like mothballs and someone else's sweat, but it was warm, lined with a layer of synthetic insulation. She tucked the rose carefully into the interior pocket, making sure it wouldn't be crushed. The basement window was small, barely 18 inches wide and 12 inches tall, set high in the wall near the ceiling. It was the only point of egress besides the stairs, and it had the advantage of opening onto the side of the house that faced the forest away from the courtyard and the bonfire and the celebration. She had oiled the hinges 2 weeks ago using grease stolen from the kitchen. The window opened silently, swinging outward into the night. Cold air rushed in so frigid it stole the breath from her lungs. -23 felt like a physical force, a malevolent presence that wanted to strip the warmth from her body and leave her frozen. But she had prepared for this. She had survived Montana winters before. She could survive this one. Wren pulled herself up to the window, her arms shaking with the effort. She was weak from hunger from 2 years of inadequate nutrition and constant labor, but desperation gave her strength. She wriggled through the opening, her hips barely fitting her coat catching on the frame. For one terrible moment, she was stuck half in and half out, visions of being found like this, trapped and helpless, flashing through her mind. Then she twisted hard, and her hips slipped through. She tumbled out into the snow, landing on her side with a muffled thump. The impact knocked the wind from her lungs. She lay there for a moment, gasping, her face pressed into snow so cold it burned like fire. The music from the pack house was muted here, filtered through walls and distance. The drums were louder, the rhythm carrying on the still air. No voices, no footsteps. She was unobserved. Wren pushed herself to her feet, brushing snow from her coat. The forest loomed ahead, a wall of darkness broken only by the skeletal outlines of bare trees. The moon was a waxing crescent, providing almost no light. She would be navigating by memory and instinct, by the faint starlight reflected off snow, by the feel of the terrain beneath her boots. She started walking. The first mile was the hardest. The snow was knee-deep in places, crusted on top with a layer of ice that broke beneath her weight with every step. It was loud, too loud, each footfall crunching and cracking in the silence. But the forest swallowed the sound, and the distance from the pack house grew with every step. By the time she reached the creek, she allowed herself to breathe a little easier. The creek was frozen solid, a ribbon of white cutting through the darkness. She followed it northeast, her boots finding purchase on the ice, her breath coming in ragged gasps that crystallized instantly in the air. Her lungs burned. Her thighs ached. The infected burn on her wrists throbbed in time with her heartbeat, a dull metronome of pain. But she was moving. She was free, even if only for a few stolen hours. The night pressed close around her, intimate and vast all at once. The forest should have been alive with sound. Owls hunting, foxes calling, the distant howls of patrol wolves marking their territory. But tonight the wilderness was silent, holding its breath. It was unnatural, wrong. Every instinct Wren possessed screamed at her to turn back, to return to the dubious safety of the pack house. But she kept walking. Her father had taught her that fear was information, not instruction. Feel it, acknowledge it, then decide if it was useful. Right now, her fear was telling her that something in these woods was watching. Something big, something that made the predators go quiet. She kept walking anyway. At the 1.5 mile mark where the creek forked, she cut east. The trees grew denser here, old-growth pine that blocked what little starlight there was. She navigated by touch, one hand outstretched, feeling her way from trunk to trunk. Her eyes adjusted slowly to the deeper darkness, picking out variations in shadow that suggested obstacles or paths forward. The old logging road appeared exactly where her mental map said it would be. Two ruts in the snow, barely visible, overgrown with saplings and brambles. No one had used this road in a decade, not since the timber company had pulled out and declared the northern forest protected land. She crossed it quickly, exposed vulnerable, then plunged back into the tree cover on the far side. The lightning-struck oak was a jagged silhouette against the sky, its split trunk unmistakable. Wren adjusted her course, angling northeast again. Her internal clock said she had been walking for 41 minutes. 6 minutes ahead of schedule. Good. She could afford to slow down to approach the cemetery carefully to make sure she wasn't walking into an ambush. Because that fear, the one that said something was watching, had not faded. If anything, it was stronger now. She crested the final hill and stopped. Below her, spread across a shallow valley, was St. Jude Cemetery. The wrought iron gates stood open, their hinges rusted into permanent welcome. Headstones jutted from the snow like broken teeth, crooked and weathered. Most were simple markers, flat stones with names and dates worn smooth by time and neglect. A few were more elaborate crosses or angels carved from granite, the pretensions of wolves who had died believing they mattered. The cemetery was empty, no movement, no sound, just snow and stone and silence. But Wren's instincts screamed otherwise. She stood at the top of the hill for a full minute, scanning the graveyard, looking for anything out of place. Her breath came faster now, not from exertion but from adrenaline, from the prey animal part of her brain that recognized when a predator was near, even if she couldn't see it. There, in the far corner beneath the old oak tree where her father's grave lay, a shape, no multiple shapes, low to the ground, pale against the snow, so still they might have been statues. Wolves. Wren's chest tightened. She took an involuntary step backward, her boots sliding on the icy hillside. Patrol had Garrett discovered her absence already. But no, the patrol wolves were brown and gray, the standard coloring of the Hollow Creek pack. These wolves were white, pristine, blinding white, their fur so pale they seemed to glow in the darkness. And they were massive, easily twice the size of any wolf she had ever seen. She counted them. 10, 15, 20. 20 massive white wolves arranged in a perfect circle around her father's grave, their heads lowered, their bodies motionless. They weren't hunting, they weren't patrolling, they were guarding or mourning. Every instinct Wren possessed told her to run, turn around, go back to the pack house, forget this insane mission, survive to see another day. She was an Omega. Her biology demanded submission in the presence of higher-ranking wolves. And these creatures, whatever they were, radiated a power that made her knees weak and her vision blur at the edges. But she had come this far. She had risked everything to be here on this night, on this anniversary. Her father had told her the truth was buried here. She couldn't turn back now. Wren forced her legs to move. One step down the hill, then another. Each footfall felt like she was walking toward her own execution, but she didn't stop. The white wolves remained motionless, their circle unbroken. As she drew closer, she could see details, scars beneath their fur. The rise and fall of their breathing synchronized as if they shared a single heartbeat. Their eyes, dozens of eyes reflecting the starlight in shades of blue and amber and green. She stopped 10 feet from the outer edge of their circle, close enough to see the headstone now, her father's name barely visible beneath a dusting of snow. Elias Ashford, born 1966, died 2017. Beloved father. The words were simple, carved by the pack's stonemason as a matter of duty, not affection. Wren pulled the frozen rose from her pocket. Her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. The petals crackled, brittle with ice. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her voice sounded impossibly small in the vast silence. "I'm sorry I haven't been able to visit. I'm sorry I left you alone here. I'm sorry I don't know what you meant about the truth being buried." The wolves didn't move, but she felt their attention shift, all of it focusing on her like the beam of a searchlight. The pressure of their combined aura was suffocating. Her Omega instincts screamed at her to bare her throat, to submit, to drop to her knees and beg for mercy. She took another step forward. A twig snapped beneath her boot. The sound was like a gunshot in the stillness. 20 heads snapped up in perfect unison. 40 eyes locked onto her. Wren froze, the rose clutched in her hand, her pulse hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. This was it. This was how she died. Torn apart by strange wolves in a forgotten cemetery, her body left to freeze, no one to mourn her. But the attack didn't come. Instead, the circle parted. The wolves moved smoothly, fluidly, creating an opening that led directly to her father's grave. An invitation, or a test. Wren didn't question it. She walked forward, her boots crunching through the snow, her eyes fixed on the headstone. The wolves closed ranks behind her, reforming the circle with her inside it now. She could feel their body heat, smell the musk of their fur, hear the low rumble of breathing that was almost a growl, but not quite. She knelt in the snow beside her father's grave, the cold seeping through her jeans immediately. She placed the frozen rose on the headstone, her fingers lingering on the carved letters of his name. "I miss you," she said softly. "Every day. I miss your voice. I miss your garden. I miss feeling safe." A presence moved behind her. Massive. Overwhelming. The air itself seemed to vibrate with power. Wren squeezed her eyes shut, waiting for teeth to sink into her neck, for claws to tear through her coat. Instead, she heard a sound she didn't expect. The wet, visceral crunch of bones breaking and rearranging. The sound of a body transforming, shifting from wolf to man. It took maybe 10 seconds, but each second stretched into eternity. Then a voice rough as gravel, dark as smoke, spoke from directly behind her. "Look at me." It wasn't a request. It was a command delivered with the weight of absolute authority. Wren's body obeyed before her mind could protest. She turned, still kneeling, and looked up. Standing over her was a man. He was naked from the waist up, his skin steaming in the frigid air, as if his body was a furnace. He was tall, at least 6 feet 4 inches, with shoulders broad enough to block out the stars behind him. His chest and arms were mapped with scars, old wounds that spoke of battles survived and lessons learned. Dark hair fell across his forehead, damp with melting snow. A particularly vicious scar ran from his collarbone down across his left pectoral, disappearing below the waistband of the tactical trousers that hung low on his hips. But it was his eyes that held her. Gold. Pure, molten gold glowing faintly in the darkness. Not the yellow gold of a typical wolf, but something deeper, older, touched with fire. He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked past her, down at the headstone, at the name carved there. "Elias," he said, and there was something in his voice. Grief, respect, debt. He shifted his gaze back to Wren. His eyes moved over her face, studying her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "You look just like him," he said finally. "Same eyes, same stubborn jaw." Wren's voice came out as a rasp. "You knew my father." The man didn't answer immediately. He lowered himself into a crouch, bringing his face level with hers. Up close, she could see more details. The scar on his neck looked like it had come from claws, 4 parallel lines that had nearly torn his throat out. His nose had been broken at least twice. His knuckles were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who knew violence intimately. He reached out slowly, giving her time to flinch away if she wanted to. She didn't. Couldn't. She was frozen, caught between terror and a strange, irrational curiosity. His hand moved to her face, fingers rough but gentle, as they tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was warm, impossibly warm in the sub-zero cold. "Knew him." The man let out a dark, humorless laugh. "Girl, your father is the only reason I'm breathing." Before Wren could process that statement, before she could ask what he meant, the silence of the night shattered. An engine roared to life somewhere on the access road. Headlights swept across the cemetery gates, bright and blinding. A vehicle skidded to a stop, tires crunching on gravel and ice. Doors slammed. Voices shouted, slurred with alcohol and fury. "Well, well, well." The voice boomed across the graveyard, loud enough to make Wren flinch. I wondered where the little rat had scurried off to. Garrett, Alpha Garrett Voss, flanked by 2 of his betas, striding through the cemetery gates like he owned them, which in a sense he did. The pack claimed dominion over all territory within a 50-mile radius. This cemetery, forgotten as it was, fell under that claim. Garrett carried a shotgun in one hand and a half-empty bottle of whiskey in the other. The betas were armed too, one with a rifle, the other with a baseball bat. They were drunk, all 3 of them, stumbling slightly as they navigated the uneven ground between the headstones. But they hadn't seen the white wolves yet. The creatures had melted back into the shadows, blending seamlessly with the snowdrifts and darkness. They were invisible, silent, waiting. Garrett's drunken gaze was fixed on Wren and the man standing over her. "Hey," Garrett barked, racking the shotgun with an aggressive metallic click. "Get away from my property. That Omega belongs to Hollow Creek." The man straightened slowly, rising to his full height. He didn't look at Garrett. He kept his eyes on Wren, his expression shifting into something that might have been concern or calculation. "Does he now?" The man's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried across the frozen ground like thunder. "Please," Wren breathed. Her hands were trembling violently now, shock and adrenaline, and the reality of her situation crashing down on her all at once. "Just go. He'll kill you." The man smiled. It was a terrifying expression, all teeth and lethal promise. "Stay here, Wren," he said, speaking her name, though she hadn't told him what it was. How did he know? Had her father talked about her? Then he turned to face Garrett. Garrett marched toward them, his confidence bolstered by alcohol and the presence of his betas and the weapon in his hands. To him, this was simple. A trespasser, a lone wolf, probably a drifter, or a rogue stupid enough to poach on claimed territory, easy prey. I said, move, Garrett shouted again, leveling the shotgun at the man's chest. And you, Ren, get your worthless ass over here. You're spending the next week in the isolation box for this little stunt. The isolation box. A concrete cell in the basement, 6 feet by 4 feet, no light, no heat. Ren had spent 3 days there once after she had tried to sneak extra food to a pregnant Omega who was being starved as punishment. She had nearly died. The memory alone made her stomach clench with fear. The man stood completely still. He wore only those tactical trousers, his torso bare to the killing cold. But he didn't shiver, didn't even seem to notice the temperature. His arms hung loose at his sides, relaxed, unthreatening. Put the weapon down, pup, he said. His tone was calm, almost bored. Garrett's face turned purple. He was an alpha. Nobody called him pup. Do you know who I am? He roared. I am Alpha Garrett Voss of the Hollow Creek Pack. This is my territory. You're trespassing, and that gives me the right to execute you on sight. Hollow Creek. The man tested the name on his tongue like it tasted sour. A bottom-tier pack. Territory of maybe 300 square miles. Primary export is low-grade timber. Financial status is borderline bankrupt. Your pack house is mortgaged twice over and you're 6 months behind on payments to the Northern Council. Garrett froze. The color drained from his face. Who the hell are you? I'm the man holding the debt, the stranger said quietly. Then he raised one hand, a lazy, dismissive gesture. The growling started. It began as a subsonic vibration so low it was more felt than heard. It rattled Ren's teeth, shook the snow from the nearby trees, made the ground beneath her knees tremble. Then the sound rose, building, swelling, until it filled the night like an avalanche of rage. From the shadows from behind headstones, from the tree line, the white wolves emerged. They moved with synchronized precision, stepping into the open, where the moonlight caught their fur and made them look like ghosts, like death itself given form. 20 massive creatures, each one a nightmare made flesh, their eyes glowing in the darkness. One by one they stepped forward, forming a loose semicircle around the man, around Ren. Their lips peeled back from fangs the size of daggers. Their growls harmonized into a chorus of promised violence. Garrett dropped the shotgun. It hit the snow with a muffled thump. One of the betas whimpered, backing away until he tripped over a low headstone and fell hard on his back. The other beta simply stood frozen, the baseball bat slipping from his nerveless fingers. Winterborn, Garrett gasped. The word came out, strangled, barely audible. They're Winterborn, the Royal Guard. You're half right, the man said, stepping forward. The snow beneath his bare feet didn't crunch. It melted water pooling around his toes, steam rising. My wolves served the Guard once, 50 years ago, before the purge, before the old kings fell. Now they serve me. He stopped inches from Garrett. Garrett was a big man, 6'2", 220 pounds of muscle and dominance. But standing before this stranger, he looked small, diminished. The pressure radiating off the man was overwhelming, aura so powerful it made Garrett's knees buckle. He collapsed, falling forward onto all fours, his wolf forcing him into submission, whether he wanted it or not. His head bowed, exposing the back of his neck. A whine escaped his throat, high and desperate. My name, the stranger said, his voice echoing across the graveyard, carrying to every corner of the frozen valley, is Thorn Blackridge. Ren gasped. The name hit her like a physical blow. Thorn Blackridge, the alpha of the Frostborn, the king of the north. He was a legend, a myth whispered about in scared voices around winter fires. He was said to control half the Lycan territories in North America. Rumored to be ruthless, wealthy beyond measure, and utterly without mercy. And he was standing on her father's grave. Thorn looked down at Garrett with pure disgust. You allowed Elias Ashford's daughter to starve, he said. Each word was precise, sharp as a blade. You dressed her in rags. You burned her. You treated her like property, like garbage. She's an Omega, Garrett stammered, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. It's tradition. Her father was nobody. A coward who refused to fight, who died of a weak heart. Thorn moved faster than Ren's eyes could follow. One moment he was standing still. The next his hand had closed around Garrett's throat, lifting the alpha 3 feet into the air. Garrett clawed at the grip, choking his legs, kicking uselessly. Elias Ashford! Thorn hissed, his face inches from Garrett's purpling one. Saved my life in the Ketchikan Wilderness raids of 2008. I was shot. Silver bullet lodged next to my spine, bleeding out in the snow, surrounded by hunters who wanted my head on a wall. Elias found me. He pulled that bullet out with a pair of pliers and his bare hands. Then he carried me 12 miles through a blizzard with his own spine fractured from the weight. He collapsed twice. Got up twice. He didn't stop until I was safe. Thorne's grip tightened. Garrett's eyes bulged. His face turned from purple to blue. He wasn't a coward. Thorne continued, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. He was the greatest tracker the Northern Alliance ever employed. He went into hiding because he stole something valuable, something worth dying for. And I thought, Thorne's expression shifted just for a moment, grief flickering across his features. I thought he was hiding to protect himself. I was wrong. He turned his head, looking back at Wren. He was hiding to protect her. Thorne released Garrett, hurling him sideways with enough force that the Alpha flew a full 10 feet before crashing into a granite obelisk. The stone cracked, splitting down the middle. Garrett crumpled to the ground and didn't get up unconscious. Or dead, Wren couldn't tell which. The betas didn't move to help him. They stood frozen eyes wide, smart enough to know that any movement might draw the attention of the winterborn wolves. The creatures had tightened their formation, creating a wall of white fur and muscle blocking any escape route. Thorne turned his back on the scene and walked toward Wren. She was still kneeling, her mind reeling, trying to process everything that had just happened. He stopped in front of her, then slowly, deliberately shrugged out of a heavy fur-lined coat that one of the winterborn wolves had retrieved from somewhere and brought to him in its jaws. He draped the coat over Wren's shoulders. It was massive, designed for someone of his size, and it engulfed her completely. But it was warm, impossibly warm, and it smelled like him. Expensive tobacco, cedar, and something else. Power. Ancient, undeniable power. The debt I owed your father was a life for a life, Thorne said quietly, crouching down so he could meet her eyes. I promised him that if anything ever happened to him, I would balance the scales. I would make sure you were safe. He looked past her at the headstone at her father's name. I was too late to save him, he said, and there was real anguish in his voice. I didn't know he was here, didn't know he'd left the protection of the Northern Alliance. My trackers only found his death certificate last week, filed in a backwater Montana town listed as natural causes. His jaw clenched. I failed him. He extended his hand toward her. It was scarred, calloused, the hand of a warrior who had fought and bled and survived. But it was steady. But I won't fail you, he said. The debt passes to the next of kin. You're coming with me. You're coming north to the Frostborn. Wren stared at his hand. She looked at the unconscious Garrett, at the life of misery and pain she was leaving behind. She looked at the white wolves, at creatures of legend that had appeared on her father's grave like guardians summoned by prayer. Why, she whispered. Her voice was hoarse, raw. I'm just an Omega. I'm nothing. Thorne's expression hardened. He glanced at the headstone one last time, then back at her. Elias didn't die of heart failure, Wren, he said. The autopsy report I stole from the local coroner showed massive amounts of wolfsbane in his system. 0.8 grams injected directly into his carotid artery. That's not a heart attack. That's assassination. Wren's hand flew to her mouth. No, she had suspected, but hearing it confirmed. And whoever killed him, Thorne continued, his eyes darkening to a dangerous amber, was looking for something he stole, something he hid. He paused, his gaze moving over her, penetrating, as if he could see through skin and bone to whatever secrets lay beneath. I think, he said slowly, he hid it in you. The journey from the cemetery to the landing strip took 23 minutes. Wren spent most of it in a state of shock, wrapped in Thorne Blackridge's coat, seated in the back of an armored SUV that cost more than the entire Hollow Creek pack house. The interior was black leather and polished chrome, temperature-controlled, insulated against the cold so thoroughly that within minutes her fingers began to ache as circulation returned to her frozen extremities. Thorne sat across from her in the spacious rear compartment, his long legs stretched out, his bare torso finally covered by a black tactical shirt that one of the Winterborn had retrieved from the convoy of vehicles that had apparently been waiting just beyond the cemetery. He hadn't spoken since they left. He had simply lifted her into the vehicle, ignoring her weak protests, and settled into his seat with the stillness of a predator at rest. Two Winterborn wolves ran alongside the convoy, their white forms ghosting through the forest like spirits. The rest, Wren assumed, were in the other vehicles. She could see headlights behind them, a procession of black SUVs moving through the Montana wilderness with military precision. She should have been terrified. She should have been fighting, screaming, demanding to be released. But exhaustion had settled into her bones, heavy as lead. And beneath the exhaustion was something else, a strange, desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, this was real, that her father had friends she didn't know about, that someone actually cared whether she lived or died. Stop thinking so loud, Thorne murmured without looking up from the tablet he was reading. Your pulse is racing. It's distracting. Ren flinched. I didn't say anything. You don't have to. He finally looked up at his golden eyes reflecting the blue glow of the screen. I can hear every beat of your heart. Smell your fear mixing with confusion and hope. Yes, hope. That's interesting. He set the tablet to his phone. If I wanted you dead, I would have left you in the snow or let Garrett finish what he started 2 years ago. You said my father was murdered. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. You said he hid something in me. What does that mean? Thorne studied her for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, bringing himself closer. The space between them shrank, became intimate in a way that made her breath catch. We'll discuss it when we're secure, he said. Hollow Creek isn't safe. The people who killed Elias, they have ears everywhere, even in the middle of nowhere, especially in the middle of nowhere. Small packs are easy to buy. What people, Ren pressed. Who would want to kill my father? He was just a gardener. He grew roses. No, Thorne's voice was flat certain. He wasn't just a gardener. That was his cover. Elias Ashford was one of the Northern Alliance's most valuable assets, a keeper of secrets, a guardian of things that should have stayed buried. Before she could ask more, the convoy pulled to a stop. They had arrived at a private airstrip, nothing more than a cleared field and a paved runway. A jet waited on the tarmac, sleek and black, its engines already warming with a low whine. The tail fin bore an insignia, a wolf skull crowned with icicles. The mark of the Frostborn. Thorne opened the door and stepped out, then turned back to offer his hand. Ren stared at it. Accepting help felt like accepting a debt, but her legs were shaking weak from cold and exhaustion and the adrenaline crash that was starting to hit her system. She took his hand. His grip was warm, steady, and he pulled her from the vehicle with easy strength. The moment her boots touched the frozen tarmac, the wind hit her vicious and sharp. Even wrapped in Thorne's coat, she shivered. He noticed. Of course he noticed. Without a word, he moved to stand between her and the wind, using his body as a shield. Get on the plane, he said. We have a long flight ahead. The interior of the jet was unlike anything Ren had ever seen. She had never been on a plane before, had barely left Hollow Creek territory in her entire life. This was luxury beyond her comprehension. Cream leather seats wide enough to be called chairs. Polished wood paneling. Soft lighting that didn't hurt her eyes. A fully stocked galley visible through an open door. The air smelled clean, filtered with a faint hint of something expensive. Leather and cedar and money. Thorne pointed to one of the reclining seats near the window. Sit, sleep. We have a 7-hour flight. Where are we going? Ren lowered herself into the seat, her body sinking into cushions so soft she nearly gasped. After 2 years of sleeping on a cot with a blanket thin enough to see through, this felt obscene. The Yukon Territory, Thorne said. He moved to the galley, pulled out a bottle of water and a wrapped sandwich. He brought both to her, set them on the small table beside her seat. Eat, sleep. We'll talk when we arrive. Ren looked at the sandwich. Turkey, lettuce, tomato on fresh bread. Real food. Her stomach clenched with a hunger so intense it was painful. But years of conditioning made her hesitate. Am I allowed? Something flickered across Thorne's face. Anger, maybe, or grief. You're not a prisoner, Ren. You're under my protection now. Eat. She unwrapped the sandwich with trembling fingers and took a small bite. The flavors exploded across her tongue, so rich and real after months of thin soup and stale bread that she had to close her eyes. She made herself eat slowly, taking small bites, knowing that her shrunken stomach couldn't handle too much too fast. Thorne watched her for a moment longer, then turned away. Sleep, he said again, moving toward the front of the cabin. That's an order. The plane began to move, taxiing down the runway. Within minutes, they were airborne, the ground falling away beneath them. Ren pressed her face to the window, watching Montana disappear into darkness. Somewhere down there was Hollow Creek. Garrett Voss unconscious, or worse, in the cemetery. The life she was leaving behind. She didn't feel sad about it. She felt numb. Exhaustion won over fear. Ren curled up in the massive seat, pulled Thorne's coat tighter around herself, and fell into a dreamless, black void. She woke to the sensation of descent, her ears popping as the plane lost altitude. Disoriented, she sat up, blinking in the soft cabin lighting. How long had she slept? The darkness outside the windows was absolute. No lights, no cities, just endless black. Thorne was seated across the aisle, still reading his tablet, a cup of coffee steaming on the table beside him. He glanced up as she stirred. We're landing in 5 minutes. Look out your window. Ren turned to the glass and gasped. Below them lay a world transformed. This wasn't the dirty, slushy snow of Montana. This was the true north, pristine and savage and endless. Mountains rose like fangs, their peaks piercing a sky painted with the faint green shimmer of Aurora Borealis. Valleys stretched between the peaks, filled with forests so dense they looked black. And there, in the center of a massive valley surrounded by jagged ridges, stood a fortress, the Frostborn Citadel. It rose from the living rock, a structure of black stone and glass that seemed to grow organically from the mountain itself. 8 stories tall, maybe more, with towers at each corner and walls thick enough to withstand siege. Windows glowed with golden light, warm against the frozen landscape. Ren could see figures moving on the walls, guards or soldiers patrolling the perimeter. Below the fortress, a village sprawled, smaller buildings arranged in neat rows, smoke rising from chimneys. Home, Thorn said quietly. There was something in his voice. Pride, maybe. Or loneliness. The plane touched down on a private runway carved into the valley floor. The landing was smooth, professional. Within moments, they had taxied to a stop and the cabin door was opening, stairs extending to the tarmac. The cold that rushed in was different from Montana. Sharper, cleaner. It hurt to breathe the air so frigid it felt like inhaling knives. Ren pulled the coat tighter, but it was useless. This cold had teeth. Thorn descended the stairs first, and Ren followed, gripping the railing to keep from slipping on ice that had already formed on the metal. The moment her boots touched the ground, she understood why the Frostborn were legendary. This wasn't just cold. This was a land that killed the weak, that tested you with every breath, that demanded strength or offered death. A reception committee waited on the tarmac, not cheering, not welcoming. They stood in rigid formation, dozens of them dressed in black tactical gear. These were the Frostborn, taller than the Hollow Creek wolves, broader through the shoulders, their faces hard and weathered. They looked like soldiers, like warriors forged in ice and blood. A man stepped forward from the formation. He was older, maybe early 40s, with silver hair cropped short and a scar that ran through his left eyebrow, giving him a perpetual look of skepticism. His eyes were pale gray, assessing Ren with the cold calculation of someone evaluating a threat or an asset. "Perimeter is secure, Alpha," he reported, his voice crisp, military. "Medical is prepped as you ordered." "Good." Thorn placed a hand on Ren's shoulder, a gesture that looked protective, but she suspected was also possessive. "Ren, this is Ronan, my beta. Ronan, you will treat this woman as you would treat me. Any threat to her is a threat to the Frostborn." Ronan's expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened with interest. "Understood, Alpha." He glanced at Ren, gave a short nod. Ma'am. No one had ever called her ma'am. She didn't know how to respond. Thorn turned back to her. "Ronan will escort you to the infirmary. You need to be examined." Panic spiked through Ren's chest, sharp and immediate. The infirmary. Doctors. In Hollow Creek, the clinic was where Garrett sent Omegas to be punished, to be corrected, to be hurt, in ways that left no visible marks. She had been there twice. She still had nightmares. "No," the word came out, strangled. She stepped back, shaking her head. "Please, no doctors." Thorn paused. He saw the terror dilating her pupils, saw her breathing accelerate toward hyperventilation. He didn't snap at her, didn't force her. Instead, he stepped closer, invading her space until all she could see was him, all she could smell was cedar and winter. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice dropping to that low rumble that vibrated through her bones. She looked up, met those golden eyes. "My doctors are not butchers," Thorn said, each word deliberate, a promise carved in stone. "You have 3 broken ribs on your left side. I can see them when you breathe. Your left ankle was fractured sometime in the past year and healed wrong. You're severely malnourished, probably anemic, and you have an infection in the burn on your wrist that, if left untreated, will spread to your bloodstream and kill you within a week." He reached out gently, lifting her wrist, pulling back the sleeve of his coat to expose the angry red wound. "I did not fly 3,000 miles and invoke a blood debt to watch you die of sepsis. Do you understand me?" "I can't," she whimpered. The trauma was too deep, too visceral. The white coats, the smell of antiseptic, the cold metal tables. It paralyzed her. Thorn stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to Ronan. "Dismiss the medical team. Clear the Alpha Suite. No one enters." Ronan's eyes widened slightly. "Sir, the Alpha Suite is restricted. No one has been permitted." "Do it." Thorn growled, a flash of his wolf surfacing in his eyes, turning them from gold to amber. "I'll treat her myself." The Alpha Suite occupied the entire top floor of the Citadel. The elevator ride up was silent except for the mechanical hum of gears and cables. Ren stood in the corner, making herself as small as possible. Thorn stood near the doors, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. The doors opened onto a private foyer. Dark wood paneling, a chandelier made from antlers, and Edison bulbs, a coat rack carved from a single piece of driftwood. Thorn led her through double doors into the main living space, and Ren stopped, unable to process what she was seeing. The suite was larger than the entire ground floor of the Hollow Creek pack house. The ceilings soared 20 feet high, crossed with exposed timber beams. Floor-to-ceiling windows dominated the far wall, offering a panoramic view of the frozen valley and the mountains beyond. Furniture was arranged in conversation areas. Leather sofas, thick rugs, a fireplace big enough to stand in. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with leather-bound volumes. The space managed to feel both vast and intimate, a contradiction Ren couldn't reconcile. "This way," Thorne said, guiding her toward another set of doors. The master bathroom was behind them, and it looked like something from a magazine. Stone walls, heated floors, a massive soaking tub already filling with water that steamed in the cool air. The scent of eucalyptus filled the space. Thorne moved to a cabinet, pulling out medical supplies. Gauze, antiseptic, several jars of salves that smelled herbal and earthy. He set them on the counter with practiced efficiency. "Strip," he said, not looking at her. Ren's hands flew to the collar of his coat. "What? You need to be clean before I can assess the damage." His voice was clinical, devoid of any sexual suggestion. "I need to see the skin. All of it." "I can wash myself," she said, her voice trembling. "You can barely stand." He turned to face her, and his expression was patient but firm. "Ren, I am over 700 years old by bloodline. I have seen everything. You are not a woman to me right now. You are a broken thing that needs fixing. Now get in the water." The way he said it, matter of fact and without judgment, somehow made it easier. Ren shed his coat first, then the stolen wool coat beneath it, her thermal shirt, the jeans held up with rope, the layers of socks, the boots. She stood in the center of the bathroom in nothing but threadbare undergarments, her body exposed in a way that made her want to disappear. Thorne's eyes went immediately to the injuries, the burns on her arms and wrists, the bruises in various stages of healing across her ribs and shoulders, the way her hip bones jutted sharp enough to cut. The scars, old and new, mapping a history of abuse. A low growl built in his chest, not directed at her, but at what had been done to her. It was a sound so deep it made the water in the tub ripple, made the glass in the windows rattle. It was the sound of a predator deciding who to kill. "Get in," he choked out, turning away, his hands clenched into fists. She could see the veins standing out on his forearms, the tension in his shoulders. He was barely holding control. Ren shed the last of her clothes and sank into the water. The heat was almost painful, stinging her abraded skin, but within seconds it transformed into relief so profound she had to bite back a sob. She had not been truly warm in 2 years. She had forgotten what it felt like. For the next hour, the most feared alpha in North America played nurse. He washed the grime from her hair with surprisingly gentle hands, working through tangles with patience she didn't expect. He scrubbed the dirt from her skin with a soft cloth, careful around injuries, clinical in his attention. He didn't speak much, and neither did she. The only sounds were water breathing and the occasional hiss when antiseptic hit an open wound. When she was clean, he wrapped her in a robe so thick and soft it felt like being embraced by clouds. He sat her on the edge of the massive bed in the adjoining room and opened one of the jars of salve. "The ribs will heal on their own with wolfsbane extract, but it will burn," he warned. "This paste accelerates healing. 3 days instead of 3 weeks. But the price is pain." He applied the dark green paste to her side. Ren bit her lips so hard she tasted blood, but she didn't scream. The pain was sharp, then cooling, then gone, replaced by a strange tingling warmth. "Now," Thorne said, wiping his hands on a towel. "Turn around, I need to check your spine." "My spine is fine," Ren said automatically. "Elias was a tracker," Thorne said, his voice taking on a lecturing tone. "But before that, he was a keeper for the Northern Alliance archives. If he hid something, he wouldn't swallow it, wouldn't bury it somewhere it could be found. He would have inscribed it, encoded it, made it part of something that couldn't be stolen without destroying it." Understanding dawned cold and terrible. "You think he put it in me?" "Turn around," Thorne repeated. Ren turned her back to him. She felt the cool air of the room on her damp skin, felt Thorne lean in close. His breath hitched. "What is it?" she asked, twisting to look at him. Thorne was staring at her back, his expression frozen somewhere between shock and awe. "How long have you had this scar?" He traced a line down her shoulder blade with one finger. "The starburst pattern, right between your shoulder blades." "Which one?" Ren asked bitterly. "There are many. This one." His finger circled a specific area. "It's different from the others." "I don't know. I've had it since I was a child. My father said I fell on a rake in the garden." "A rake." Thorne repeated the word like it was the most absurd thing he'd ever heard. "Stay still." He walked to the window and pulled the heavy blackout curtains closed, plunging the room into darkness. "What are you doing?" Panic crept into Ren's voice. "Trust me," came in his response from the dark. A violet light clicked on. Ultraviolet. Ren could hear Thorn pull a tactical UV flashlight from somewhere, the kind used by forensics teams. He shone it on her back. She gasped. In the mirror across the room, she could see the reflection. The scar on her back wasn't just white tissue. Under the UV light, it glowed, brilliant bioluminescent blue. And it wasn't just the scar. Intricate lines spread out from it like veins spider webbing across her skin in patterns that looked almost like writing. Ancient symbols, geometric shapes, flowing script that seemed to move, shifting and reforming even as she watched. My God, Thorn whispered. What is it? Ren cried, clawing at her own shoulder as if to scrub it off. What did he do to me? Thorn clicked off the light and moved to her, instantly grabbing her wrist to stop her from scratching. He pulled her against his chest, holding her still. He didn't hurt you, he said urgently. He saved it. The Codex. The Codex? Ren's voice was muffled against his shirt. Thorn pulled back his hands on her shoulders, his eyes searching hers. The Wolf Kings, the original Alphas who ruled before the Alliance, before the Councils, before the modern age. They created a record, a map of bloodlines, weapon caches, the locations of the dormant elder wolves still sleeping in the deep places of the world. It was lost 50 years ago during the Great Purge. The Council claimed it was destroyed. He looked at her back again, even though the glow had faded in the normal light. Elias stole it. He realized the pieces falling into place. He liquefied the data somehow, turned it into a bioreactive enzyme. Then he tattooed it into your DNA. Probably when you were young enough that you wouldn't remember, wouldn't understand. Thorn stood pacing the room, energy crackling off him. You're not just his daughter, Ren. You are the most dangerous object on this planet. If the High Council finds out you have this, they won't just kill you. They'll dissect you, study you, try to extract every piece of information from your body. Ren sat on the bed, small and trembling in the oversized robe. So that's why Garrett hated me. He knew. No. Thorn stopped pacing. Garrett was an idiot. He just saw a weak Omega. If he'd known what you carried, he would have sold you to the highest bidder years ago. His expression darkened. But whoever killed Elias, they knew. They knew he had the Codex. They just didn't know where he hid it. He walked back to the bed, looked down at her with an intensity that made her chest tighten. You can never leave this room without me, he said, his voice low and possessive. Do you understand? No one sees your skin. No one touches you. From this moment on, you are mine. Yours, Ren's voice was barely a whisper. My responsibility. Thorn corrected quickly, though his eyes lingered on her face a moment too long. My burden. The debt I owe Elias. A knock pounded on the suite door, sharp and urgent. Thorn stiffened. Enter, he barked. Ronan appeared in the doorway of the bedroom, his face pale. He held a satellite phone in his hand. Alpha, he said, his voice tight. We have a problem. I'm busy, Ronan. It's the Southern Territory, Ronan pressed. Alpha Draven Corbin. He's on the line. He says he knows you took the girl. Thorn's eyes narrowed dangerously. And Ronan swallowed hard. He says Elias Ashford promised her to him before he died. Signed contract witnessed. He's demanding you hand over his betrothed, or he's declaring war on the Frostborn. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Thorn went very, very still. He looked at Ren, who was staring back at him in horror. Betrothed. To Draven Corbin. Corbin was known even in the isolated corners of Hollow Creek. They called him the Butcher of the South. Thorn took the phone from Ronan. He didn't put it to his ear. He put it on speaker, setting it on the nightstand. Mercer. A slick, oily voice oozed through the speaker. I hear you have my little bride. Thorn stared at Ren. Then slowly, deliberately, he reached out and placed his large, warm hand on the back of her neck. His thumb stroked the pulse point behind her ear, a gesture that was possessive and protective all at once. You are mistaken, Corbin, Thorn said into the phone, his voice deadly calm. Oh, how so? She isn't your bride, Thorn said. His eyes never left Ren's face. I have already marked her. She is my mate. Ren's breath caught. Mate. The word hung in the air, massive and irrevocable. And if you come for her, Thorn continued, his golden eyes burning into Ren's, I will burn the South to ash. He crushed the phone in his hand. Plastic shattered, electronics sparked. The pieces fell to the floor like confetti. The silence that followed was absolute. Ren found her voice. You lied. I bought us time, Thorn corrected. Draven respects property rights, not human rights. If you're just Elias's daughter, you're a loose end. If you're the mate of the Frostborn King, touching you means he has to challenge me for dominance. He won't. Not yet. But I'm not your mate, Ren insisted. Thorn's expression was unreadable. No, he agreed. Not yet. But you're going to play the part. Because the only way to keep them from killing you for that map on your back is to make you untouchable. And the only way to make you untouchable is to make you the Queen of the North. He leaned closer, his hand still on her neck, his face inches from hers. We're going to Wolf's Head. I'm calling a summit, and we're getting married in front of witnesses. Ren stared at him, her mind blank with shock. Married to the most powerful alpha in North America, to a man she had known for less than 6 hours, to a stranger who had just declared war on the South in her name. She started, her voice barely a whisper. I don't understand. Why would you do this? You don't know me. You don't owe me this much. Thorne's expression softened just a fraction. His hand was still on her neck, warm and steady, an anchor in the chaos. I owe your father everything, he said quietly. And the only way to protect what he died for, what he hid in you, is to make you mine in every way that matters to the wolf world. A mate bond can't be challenged without declaring war. Property rights, as crude as that sounds, will keep you alive. He straightened, releasing her, and the loss of his touch felt like cold water. You don't have to love me, Ren. You don't even have to like me. You just have to stand beside me for one ceremony and let the world believe the lie. After that, once the codex is decoded and secured, you can choose. Stay or go. Your freedom or your safety. But that choice comes after Wolf's Head, not before. Ren pulled the robe tighter around herself, feeling smaller than ever in the vast room in this fortress of ice and stone, in the presence of a king who had just offered her a crown made of lies. When do we leave? She asked. Thorne's eyes glinted with something that might have been respect. 3 days. I'll teach you what you need to know. How to stand like a queen. How to lawu like you mean it. He moved toward the door, then paused, looking back. Get some sleep, Ren. The next 3 weeks are going to test you in ways Garrett Voss never could. He left the door closing with a soft click. And Ren sat alone in the silence, staring at her reflection in the dark windows, wondering if the girl who had crawled through a basement window just hours ago would recognize the woman she was about to become. Outside, the aurora borealis danced across the frozen sky, green and ethereal, like the spirits of dead kings watching from the void. And somewhere deep in the citadel, in rooms Ren had not yet seen, preparations were already beginning for a wedding that would change the balance of power in the wolf world forever. She touched the back of her neck where Thorne's hand had been felt, the warmth still lingering there like a brand. The lie was already becoming truth, and she didn't know if that terrified her or gave her hope. December 24th, 2019. Dawn broke over the Yukon Valley at 9:47 a.m., spilling pale gold light across the frozen landscape. Ren woke in the massive bed of the Alpha Suite, disoriented by the softness beneath her. The warmth surrounding her, the absence of pain in her bones for the first time in 2 years. For a moment, she thought it had all been a dream. The cemetery, the white wolves, Thorne Blackridge promising to make her a queen. Then she sat up, and the weight of the thick robe reminded her it was real. The floor-to-ceiling windows showed the citadel below, wolves moving in formation across the courtyard. Her reflection in the dark glass looked like a stranger. Clean hair, skin without grime, eyes that didn't look quite so hollow. A knock sounded at the bedroom door. Ren? Thorne's voice muffled through the heavy wood. May I enter? May I? As if she had a choice. Yes. He came in carrying a tray. Coffee, toast, scrambled eggs, fruit. The smell made her stomach clench with hunger despite the sandwich she'd eaten on the plane. He set it on the small table near the window, gestured for her to sit. Eat, he said. We have work to do. Ren approached the food cautiously, still half expecting it to be snatched away. Thorne noticed. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Just poured coffee into a mug and handed it to her. She took a sip. Rich, real. Nothing like the watered-down instant coffee the Omegas got at Hollow Creek. The summit is in 17 days, Thorne said, settling into the chair across from her. That gives us time to prepare, but not much. You need to learn how to stand, how to speak, how to project authority even when you feel none. I don't understand why anyone would believe it, Ren said quietly. That you chose me. I'm nobody. You're Eric Ashford's daughter, Thorne corrected. That alone makes you significant, and you carry the codex. Once that becomes known, after we've secured your position, you'll be the most important Omega in North America. He paused. But more than that, you need to believe the lie yourself. If you don't, they'll see through it. He stood, walked to the window. Today I teach you how to walk like you own the world. Tomorrow we work on speech. The day after we introduce you to the pack. By the time we reach Wolf's Head, you'll be unrecognizable from the girl who crawled out of a basement window 3 days ago. Ren swallowed hard. And if I fail, Thorne turned his golden eyes sharp. Then Draven Corbin will challenge me, kill me, and take you. He'll skin you alive to extract the codex, And when he's done, he'll leave your body for the crows. He said it matter-of-factly without cruelty. Just truth. So you won't fail. The first lesson began after breakfast. Thorne led her to the main living area of the suite, pushed the furniture aside to create an open space. Walk to the far wall, he commanded. Wren walked. She made it 3 steps before he stopped her. No, you're hunched, shoulders back, eyes forward, not down. You're not afraid of the ground. The ground should be afraid of you. She tried again. He stopped her again. Your steps are too small. You're trying to be invisible. Take up space. The world owes you room to move. Again and again. For an hour he made her walk back and forth across the suite, correcting her posture, her stride, the angle of her chin. It was exhausting in a way physical labor had never been. This required her to fight instincts bred into her bones. By the time he called a break, her legs were shaking. But when she caught her reflection in the window, she paused. The woman walking toward her looked taller, stronger, like someone who might belong in a place like this. Better, Thorne said. He handed her a glass of water. We'll practice again this afternoon, and tomorrow, and every day until it becomes natural. That evening, as the sun set at 3:52 p.m. and darkness reclaimed the valley, Wren sat on the edge of the bed exhausted. Her ribs still ached despite the healing salve. Her wrists throbbed, but it was a different kind of tired than she'd known at Hollow Creek. This was the tiredness of growth, not survival. She was about to lie down when heat bloomed between her shoulder blades. The scar. It pulsed warm, then warmer, spreading across her skin like liquid fire. Not painful, but impossible to ignore. Wren twisted, trying to see her back in the mirror. The skin looked normal in the dim light, but the warmth intensified, and she realized with a start that it coincided with footsteps in the hallway outside. Thorne's footsteps. The door to the study opened. He appeared in the bedroom doorway, still dressed in tactical gear from whatever business he'd been conducting. Are you all right? Your heart rate just spiked. My back, Wren said, pressing a hand to her shoulder blade. It's warm. Hot even. It started when you came close. Thorne's eyes narrowed. He crossed to her in 3 strides, turned her gently. Even through the thick robe, she could feel the heat radiating from the mark. The Codex is reacting to proximity, he murmured. Royal blood. It recognizes me. Why? Because Elias used alpha blood to encode it, specifically blood from the old royal lines. He stepped back and immediately the warmth faded. Stepped closer and it returned. Fascinating and dangerous. Dangerous how? It means anyone with royal lineage will be able to sense it if they get close enough, Thorne said grimly. We'll need to keep you covered at all times in public. High collars, layers. No one can know about this reaction. But as he spoke, Wren noticed something else. The warmth wasn't unpleasant. It felt like recognition, like a lock finding its key. And when Thorne moved away, the absence felt wrong, as if something had been taken. She didn't tell him that part. December 25th, speech training. Thorne taught her to project her voice without shouting, to speak with pauses that commanded attention, rather than rushed words that begged for permission to exist. He made her recite simple statements 100 times until they sounded like declarations instead of questions. I am Wren Ashford. I am Wren Mercer. I am the mate of the Frostborn King. Each repetition chipped away at the omega conditioning that told her to be small, quiet, forgettable. By evening, her throat was raw, but the words came easier. December 26th, the blizzard hit just as Wren had predicted. The storm she'd felt building in the pressure behind her eyes in the behavior of birds days ago in Montana. It dumped 3 feet of snow in 12 hours, winds howling at 70 miles per hour. The Citadel became an island in a sea of white. Thorne found her at the window watching the storm. You knew this was coming, he said. It wasn't a question. I've been tracking weather patterns since I was 12, Wren admitted. My father taught me. It was the only thing that felt like mine. Show me. She pulled out her mental notes, explained barometric pressure, wind shear, the way temperature gradients created predictable storm systems. Thorne listened with an intensity that made her self-conscious, but he didn't interrupt. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. You're not just a vessel for the Codex, he said finally. You have value beyond what Eric hid in you. Don't forget that. It was the kindest thing anyone had said to her in 2 years, December 27th. Thorne brought Ronan to the suite. The beta's pale eyes assessed Wren with professional detachment. She needs combat training, Ronan said bluntly. If someone gets past us, she should be able to defend herself long enough for help to arrive. No, Thorne said immediately. With respect to Alpha, she's a target. She needs— I said no. Thorne's voice dropped to that dangerous rumble. Look at her wrist, her ribs, her ankle. She can barely walk without pain. Combat training can wait until she's healed. Ronan glanced at Wren, then back at Thorne. As you say, Alpha, but his expression suggested he thought Thorn was making a mistake. After Ronan left, Ren spoke quietly. He's right, I should learn to fight. You will, Thorn said, but not today. Today you learn to survive in other ways. That afternoon, he taught her the layout of the Citadel. Every exit, every safe room, every place she could hide if the fortress was breached. It was another kind of map, and Ren absorbed it the way she'd absorbed her father's teachings, committing every detail to memory. December 28th, Thorn brought clothes. Not the donated cast-offs she'd worn at Hollow Creek, but real clothes. Tailored pants that fit, thermal shirts and soft fabrics. A midnight blue dress for the summit, high neck to hide the mark, elegant enough to belong on a queen. Ren stared at herself in the mirror wearing the dress. She looked like someone else, someone who mattered. The pack meets you tomorrow, Thorn said. They'll judge you. Some will resent you. Others will dismiss you. You need to show them you're not afraid. I am afraid, Ren whispered. Then lie better. He stepped behind her, adjusting the collar of the dress. Fear is information, not instruction. Your father taught you that, didn't he? She nodded. Good. Use it. Let the fear sharpen your focus, but don't let it control your actions. His hands rested briefly on her shoulders. Through the fabric, the mark warmed in response. You're stronger than you know, Ren Ashford. Time to prove it. December 29th. The introduction to the Frostborn pack took place in the Great Hall, a massive stone chamber that could hold 300 wolves. Ren stood beside Thorn on a raised platform, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. The gathered wolves stared, some with curiosity, some with skepticism. A few with outright hostility. Thorn's voice carried across the hall without effort. This is Ren Mercer, my mate, your future queen. You will treat her with the respect due to that position, or you will answer to me. Silence. Then slowly the wolves began to bow. Not all of them, not enthusiastically, but enough to signal acceptance, however grudging. A woman near the front, blonde and beautiful, stared at Ren with undisguised hatred. Ren recognized the expression. Valeria, or someone like her. A rival. A threat. But Ren didn't look away. She met the woman's gaze and held it until the other Omega dropped her eyes first. Small victories. The days blurred together. Training, lessons, meals eaten in the suite while Thorn worked, and Ren studied maps, weather patterns, the politics of the wolf world she'd never been allowed to understand. January 2nd. Thorn declared her ready. We leave for Wolf's Head tomorrow, he said. The summit is in 6 days. Can you do this? Ren thought about the girl who'd knelt in the snow at her father's grave. The girl who'd expected to die. She thought about the woman she'd become in just 10 days. Stronger, taller, able to speak without apologizing. Yes, she said, and manned it. That night, unable to sleep, Ren stood at the window watching the aurora dance across the sky. Behind her, she heard the study door open. Thorn unable to sleep either. He stood beside her, silent for a long moment. I need you to understand something, he said finally. This marriage is political, necessary, but it doesn't have to be permanent. Once the codex is secured, once you're safe, you can choose to leave. I won't hold you to a bond made under duress. Ren looked at him. In the green light of the aurora, his face was softer than she'd seen it, almost vulnerable. And if I don't want to leave, she asked quietly. His eyes met hers, gold in the darkness. Then you stay. The mark between her shoulder blades pulsed warm. Recognition, acceptance. I think, Ren said slowly, the codex chose you for a reason. My father trusted you with his life. Maybe I should too. Thorn said nothing, but his hand found hers in the darkness, squeezed once. A promise without words. Tomorrow they would leave for Wolf's Head. Tomorrow the lie would become truth in front of witnesses. Tomorrow, Ren Ashford would become Ren Mercer, Queen of the North. But tonight, in the quiet of the Alpha Suite with the aurora painting the sky in shades of hope, she was just a girl learning to believe in herself again. And that perhaps was enough. 6 months later, July 15th, 2020, the coronation ceremony took place on the summer solstice when the sun refused to set and the Yukon Valley blazed with endless daylight. Ren stood on the steps of the Citadel, wearing a gown of white and silver, a crown of obsidian and ice upon her head. Thorn stood beside her, his hand in hers as 300 wolves bore witness. The marriage at Wolf's Head had been political, necessary. But in the months since, something had shifted. The lie had become truth, not through magic or fate, but through the quiet accumulation of moments. Shared meals, late-night conversations. The way Thorn looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching. And the way her heart had learned to beat in rhythm with his. The officiator, Elder Matthias Gray of the Alliance, spoke the final words. By the authority granted to me, I declare Ren Ashford Mercer, the Queen of the North mate, to Thorn Blackridge, bearer of the ancient rights and responsibilities of the Frostborn. The crowd erupted. Not with the grudging acceptance of 6 months ago, but with genuine celebration. Ren had earned this. Through strength, through wisdom, through the reforms she'd pushed through despite resistance. The Omega Protection Act had been signed into law 3 months ago. Abuse was now a crime punishable by exile. Omegas could own property, could refuse unwanted bonds, could live. 12 schools had been built in impoverished territories. Food distribution programs established. The old hierarchies were crumbling, replaced by something more just. And it had started with a girl who'd crawled out of a basement window to visit her father's grave. After the ceremony, Thorne led Ren to the private balcony overlooking the valley. The same view she'd seen that first night, terrified and alone. Now it looked different, like home. Regrets, Thorne asked, his arm around her waist. About which part? Ren smiled. The fake marriage that became real, the crown I never wanted, or the fact that I'm carrying the heir to the Frostborn. Thorne's hand moved to her stomach, still flat but sheltering the life growing within. 8 weeks. A daughter, the doctor said. A girl who would never know. Chains never know hunger, never know what it meant to be invisible. She'll be magnificent, Thorne murmured. Like her mother. Ren leaned into him, feeling the warmth of the mark between her shoulder blades pulse in recognition. The codex had been partially decoded, its secrets slowly revealing themselves. The locations of 3 elder wolves still sleeping, 2 weapon caches, dozens of bloodline records. But the full translation would take years, and Ren was in no hurry. Some secrets were worth protecting. A messenger approached, bowing deeply. Your Majesty, reports from Alaska. The ice caves near Denali have shown activity. Ren and Thorne exchanged a glance. The first at Elder, the one they'd known, would wake eventually. Assemble a reconnaissance team, Thorne ordered, but no engagement. We observe only. The messenger departed. Ren looked out over the valley at the wolves training below, at the village thriving in the shadow of the citadel. It's not over, is it? She said quietly. This was just the beginning. No, Thorne agreed, but we face it together. Queen and king, equals. Ren turned in his arms, rose on her toes, kissed him. Not the chaste kiss of political theater, but the kiss of a woman who'd chosen her fate and claimed it as her own. When they broke apart, she smiled. My father used to say, when the world tries to bury you, you fly above the storm. And I'm done flying away from storms. Ren said, her voice steady and sure. From now on, I am the storm. Thunder rumbled in the distance. Not a threat, a promise. The girl who'd been nothing had become everything. And the North would never be the same. Somewhere in the frozen depths of Alaska, in a cave sealed for 5 centuries, a massive eye opened. Golden, ancient, aware. The Codex had awakened more than just a queen. It had awakened the past. And the past was hungry.